I stand before you not as a soldier, not as a politician, but as a son of Africa speaking for millions. One people, one dream, one destiny. Our future is not for sale. The hall was silent. The air thick with expectation. Inside the African Union building, maps of the continent hung on the walls, their borders sharp reminders of a history not written by Africans. Leaders shifted in their seats, pens tapping on paper, aides whispering behind them. The agenda was the same as always: security, trade, cooperation. But the words felt tired, recycled from decades of promises that never came true. Then a young leader rose. Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. Just 37, with the calm presence of someone who had already carried the weight of war and hope. His uniform was simple, his voice steady. He didn't raise his hand or shout. He spoke as if the continent itself was speaking through him. One people, one dream, one destiny. The room froze. Some leaders leaned forward, drawn in by the force of the moment. Others looked away, uneasy, as if the truth cut too deep. It was more than a statement. It was a challenge, to the colonial lines carved in 1884, to the foreign systems that still divided Africa, to the silence of leaders afraid to act. Outside, the world continued, unaware. But in that room, history shifted. It was no longer a meeting. It was a declaration. Africa would no longer wait. It was a call to dream bigger than ever before. One passport for all Africans. A currency called Afro money. An economy built for the continent, not against it. But could this dream survive the weight of politics, foreign influence, and fear? Or would it be crushed before it had a chance to grow? This is the story of that moment, the battles it sparked and the hope it ignited. This is not just history. This is the fight for Africa's soul. Before Traoré spoke, the meeting was already heavy with truths no one wanted to say aloud. The African Union had gathered to confront a ghost that never left, Africa's division. A report was placed on the table. Numbers in black ink told a painful story. In 2023, only 15% of Africa's trade stayed within the continent, about $192 billion in goods exchanged from one African nation to another. In Europe, the number was 70%. In Asia, over 50%. The comparison wasn't just statistics. It was a mirror, forcing leaders to look at their reality. Picture a farmer in Senegal trying to sell rice in Mali. She loads her truck and drives to the border. Hours pass. She pays customs fees. She changes her currency and loses half her profit. By the time her rice reaches the market, she's lucky if she earns anything at all. Her struggle is not unique. It's the daily life of millions. The reason lies in borders drawn long ago, at the Berlin Conference of 1884. Lines sketched by European hands still control who trades, who prospers, and who suffers. And the report went further. Africa, with 1.4 billion people, holds the largest reserves of cobalt, platinum, and manganese, minerals that power everything from smartphones to electric cars. The world runs on Africa's wealth. Yet Africans remain locked out of their own prosperity. Yet the continent was bleeding wealth every year. Africa traded more with Europe, Asia, and America than with itself. Billions lost. Dependency on foreign markets and currencies kept Africa weak while outsiders grew rich. The delegates knew this truth. But to speak it out loud was dangerous. It meant admitting that the systems they had inherited, and often protected, were failing their own people. Then Ibrahim Traoré stood tall. His soldier's frame carried a quiet strength. He wasn't like the older leaders in the room, seasoned by decades of polished speeches and endless compromises. He was young, direct, unafraid. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. Borders are not just lines on a map, he said. They are chains. Chains forged in Berlin. Strengthened by colonial currencies. Kept alive by systems that reward dependency. The words hit hard. The Berlin Conference of 1884 wasn't just dusty history. It was an open wound. European powers had once sat around a table much like this one and carved up Africa with no regard for its people, its cultures, or its future. Those borders split tribes. They separated families. They created nations that struggled to trust each other, let alone work together. Traoré wasn't simply pointing at a problem. He was naming the enemy. And he wasn't finished. He reminded the leaders of a promise made years earlier. In 2016, in Kigali, Rwanda, the African Union had unveiled the dream of a single African passport. The vision was bold and clear, Africans moving freely across Africa, just as Europeans move across Europe. A trader from Ghana selling goods in Kenya without visas. A student from Nigeria studying in Morocco without endless paperwork. It was a dream of freedom. A dream of a borderless Africa. But nearly a decade later, the passport was still only a dream. It existed on paper. The single African passport had been launched with fanfare. But in reality, it was stuck. Ordinary Africans still faced walls at every border, visas, fees, suspicion. For many, it was easier to travel to Europe or America than to move between two African nations. Traoré's voice grew sharper. We promised our people freedom to move, he said. But we've given them walls instead. The room fell silent. Some leaders nodded, knowing he was right. Others looked down, uncomfortable. The truth was hard to face. Then came the heart of his speech, the idea that would shake the continent and the world. He proposed Afro money. A single African currency to replace the dozens scattered across 54 nations. This was not just about money. It was about power. Too many African currencies, like the CFA franc used in 14 countries, were still tied to France. Each time a trader exchanged money, value was lost. Each time a nation paid debts in foreign currencies, its strength drained away. Africa's gold, its oil, its fertile land and minerals, flowed outward, enriching others. Traoré's vision was different. Afro money would be backed by Africa's own resources. Imagine a currency tied to Ghana's gold mines, Nigeria's oil fields, Ethiopia's farmlands. Every border crossing, every customs fee, every currency exchange makes us weaker, he said. Afro money is not a gesture. It is a shield. It is survival. It is dignity. The room buzzed with tension. A single currency for 1.4 billion people. It sounded impossible. But Traoré didn't stop at dreams, he backed them with facts. Africa loses billions because it trades less with itself than any other region. Its cobalt, its lithium, its platinum, resources the world cannot live without, leave the continent cheap, while Africa stays poor. Numbers don't lie, he declared. We can follow the map of Berlin, or we can build our own future. Some leaders leaned forward, eyes glowing with possibility. Others shifted uneasily in their seats. A single African currency meant giving up control. It meant standing up to powerful nations like France. It meant risking economic chaos. But Traoré's words were like a spark in dry grass, impossible to ignore. The silence after his speech didn't last. The room erupted. Voices clashed, arguments flared, and the African Union began to show its cracks. A veteran leader, who had ruled his nation for over 30 years, leaned into his microphone. His tone was heavy, almost angry. This is reckless, he declared. A single currency means one authority. We fought for independence, we will not give it up now. His words cut deep. Independence in Africa is sacred. Won through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. The thought of a shared currency felt, to some, like surrendering hard-earned freedom. Then another leader rose, this time from a major economy in southern Africa. His objection was sharp, technical. Our inflation is already out of control, he warned. A single currency without a unified policy is impossible. It's dangerous. The room split like a cracked mirror. Some applauded Traoré, praising his courage for saying what others would not. Others whispered nervously, fearing Afro money could collapse their banks, or provoke foreign powers. Then it happened. One delegate shoved his chair back so hard it screeched against the marble floor. He stormed out, followed by a handful of others. Their footsteps echoed like a warning. Unity comes at a cost. The arguments grew louder. And then, a trembling voice emerged, from a minister of a small landlocked nation. We rely on foreign aid, he said. If we challenge the system, what happens when that aid stops? Another leader rose, this time from a coastal nation. Aid keeps us dependent, he declared. Afro money could set us free. The debate was no longer just about economics. It was about identity. It was about pride. And it was about fear. Through the chaos, Ibrahim Traoré sat calmly. His military discipline showed in his steady posture, his unblinking eyes. He listened as leaders dismissed his idea as fantasy. As others stormed out. But he did not flinch. When the noise finally died, he leaned into the microphone. His words were simple, yet cut like steel. If unity is dictatorship, then chains must be freedom. The room froze. In a single sentence, Traoré turned the argument upside down. Were these leaders truly defending sovereignty? Or were they defending the invisible chains left by colonial masters? This was no longer about currency or policy. It had become a moral question. Would Africa remain bound by the past? Or dare to build a new future? Beyond the walls of the African Union, his words spread like fire. In Lagos. In Nairobi. In Accra. Young Africans repeated them on social media. If unity is dictatorship, then chains must be freedom. The phrase became a rallying cry. University students painted it on campus walls in bright red and green. In Ouagadougou, crowds lit candles at night, chanting the words like a song of hope. Something was waking across Africa. A spark buried under decades of doubt. But the fire didn't stay contained. It spilled into the global press. Western media reacted with alarm. A French newspaper denounced Traoré's speech as reckless populism, warning it threatened stability. In Washington, a think tank dismissed it as theatrical, unsustainable. Yet their nervous tone betrayed their fear. Because Traoré's idea wasn't just a dream. It was a threat. To systems that had controlled Africa for centuries. Inside Africa, the response was electric. Social platforms lit up with debate. Young people hailed Traoré as a hero. A voice for a generation tired of broken promises. In Dar es Salaam, students held vigils, chanting, "One Africa. One money." In Accra, activists waved banners. Afro money means African freedom. The idea was no longer just a speech. It was becoming a movement. A wave rolling across the continent. But not everyone was ready to ride it. Bankers in Ivory Coast warned that abandoning the CFA franc could unleash inflation and chaos. Politicians tied to Western powers called Afro money a dangerous illusion. They feared sanctions, capital flight, and the collapse of fragile economies. The battle lines were drawn. The divide was clear. Some saw Traoré's vision as liberation. Others, as a gamble that could ruin everything. Just when it seemed the debate would collapse, a new voice broke through. The Nigerian delegation. Africa's largest economy. A nation of over 220 million people. Every eye in the chamber turned. Nigeria is not just a country. It is a giant. Its economy makes up nearly 1/5 of Africa's GDP. Its words could make, or break, Traoré's dream. The Nigerian minister rose. His voice, calm but firm. "We will not ignore the call for Afro money. Nigeria is ready to join a pilot program to test a shared African currency." The room erupted. Delegates leapt to their feet. Applause thundered. Hands reached out to grasp the ministers. For the first time, Traoré's vision was no longer a lone cry in the wilderness. It had the backing of Africa's most powerful nation. Nigeria's move was not just symbolic. It was a turning point. Economists knew the numbers. Nigeria's market is a powerhouse. If it embraced Afro money, others would have no choice but to listen. Smaller nations whispered among themselves, calculating risks and rewards. Countries tied to the CFA franc felt the pressure most. Would they stay loyal to France? Or join Nigeria, Burkina Faso, and the dream of a united Africa? The news spread faster than wildfire. In Abuja, Nigeria's capital, students and workers poured into the streets chanting, "One Africa. One money." In Bamako. In Accra. Rallies erupted, banners waving in the hot sun. Afro money means African freedom. For ordinary Africans, this was not just about economics. It was personal. Traders at dusty border towns dreamed of selling their goods without losing half their profits to exchange rates. For them, Afro money was not theory. It was hope. It was survival. It was freedom. Farmers imagined new markets, where their crops could cross borders, without endless fees. Mothers pictured using one currency to buy food, pay school fees, and afford medicine. But not everyone was celebrating. In Dar es Salaam and Abidjan, business elites raised alarms. A single currency could destabilize our economies. Inflation, debt, chaos. What happens then? Politicians loyal to Western powers echoed the warnings. Sanctions, lost aid, economic collapse. The debate was no longer confined to conference rooms. It spread to markets, homes, and village squares. Africa was alive with hope and fear, dreams and doubts. Traoré's words did not just shake Africa. They shook the world. In Paris, French officials rushed into emergency meetings. The CFA franc, used by 14 African countries, is a lifeline for France's economy. Afro money threatened to cut that lifeline. French newspapers called Nigeria's decision a seismic challenge to France's influence. In London, analysts at the London School of Economics warned a unified African currency could reshape global trade. Europe imports 20% of its raw materials from Africa. Gold, cobalt, lithium. If those deals moved into Afro money, Europe's leverage would weaken. In Washington, the reaction was sharper. A think tank speaker declared, if Afro money succeeds, Africa won't just take aid. It will negotiate as an equal. On Wall Street, unease grew. Africa holds the world's largest reserves of critical minerals. Cobalt for batteries, platinum for electronics. If Africa traded in its own currency, the US dollar's grip on global markets could weaken. Even China took notice. State media suggested Afro money could align with Beijing's push to expand the yuan's role in global trade. This was no longer an African debate. It was a global fault line. And the tremors had only begun. The world was waking up to a new Africa. For generations, global media had painted Africa as a land of wars, poverty, and aid appeals. But Traoré's speech and Nigeria's bold move changed the story. In Germany, a newspaper headline declared, "From colony to contender, Africa's currency revolution." In New York, a columnist wrote, "The world may soon negotiate with Africa, not just donate to it." Africa was no longer the backdrop. It was the main stage. And the actors were Africans. Traoré's vision didn't just spark debates. It ignited a cultural explosion. In Lagos, a rapper dropped a track with the line, "One Africa, one money, we rise." In Paris, diaspora youth marched with banners, "Our currency, our future." In Washington, students at historically black universities debated whether Afro money was a new form of civil rights movement, a fight for economic dignity. But doubts lingered. Economists in Tokyo and Brussels warned, Africa's weak infrastructure and corruption could doom the plan. Inflation, mismanagement, instability. And yet, even skeptics admitted something had shifted. The world was starting to see Africa differently. Not as a continent of despair, but as a continent daring to dream big. In Nairobi hotels and Johannesburg airports, conversations changed. Businessmen speculated about Afro money's exchange rate. Young professionals asked when they could open accounts. For the first time, African news meant ambition, strategy, and hope. Not just tragedy, Traoré had torn down the old narrative. Africa was writing its own story. And the world was listening. The debate was stuck. Half the room energized. Half the room cautious. Then, an unexpected voice broke through. Ghana, known for its careful, pragmatic approach, not for bold moves. The room fell silent as its representative stood. Holding a prepared statement, he began. We cannot forget history. We cannot ignore risk. But we cannot let the Berlin legacy chain us forever. Ghana will join a task force to design Afro money within 12 months. The applause was deafening. This wasn't blind agreement. It was commitment. Resources. Expertise. Political will. With Nigeria and Ghana, two West African powerhouses, standing beside Traoré, the tide was turning. Outside, the news hit like a thunderstorm. In Accra, radio stations called it a historic moment. Pan-African activists declared, the Berlin legacy has finally met its match. Ordinary citizens, once doubtful, began to believe Afro money could be real. The twist wasn't Traoré's boldness. That was expected. The twist was that others, once hesitant, were stepping forward to carry the dream with him. As the African Union meeting ended, Ibrahim Traoré was no longer just the president of Burkina Faso. He was becoming the symbol of a new Africa. In Bamako, murals appeared overnight, painting him alongside heroes like Kwame Nkrumah and Nelson Mandela. In Lagos, university students held candlelight vigils, praising his courage. In Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, radio hosts debated, was Traoré now the voice of a continent, tired of merely surviving, and ready to lead? Even abroad, his image was shifting. Western media labeled him a radical. But across the African diaspora, he was something else. Hope, fulfilled. In Dakar, young voices filled the squares, chanting his name. In Nairobi, lecture halls buzzed with discussions about his vision. He was more than a leader. He was the heartbeat of a generation's hope. His ideas had transformed quiet strategy sessions into a worldwide movement. The African Development Forum emptied, yet his message lingered. Across the continent, people imagined a future that felt within reach. African digital currency wasn't in wallets yet, but the concept sparked excitement, glowing in the minds of millions. Farmers dreamed of selling their harvests beyond borders, reaching markets they had never touched. Merchants imagined profits safeguarded from foreign exploitation. Students envisioned journeys with a single African passport, carrying the dignity of a united continent. His closing words carried the weight of that promise. We do not wait for approval to rise. We have awakened to claim our destiny. That was the essence of his speech. Not mere policy, but renewal. Africa dared to redraw the maps drawn centuries ago, to shape a future with its own hands, its own economy, its own story. This is more than narration. It is an invitation to believe in Africa's resurgence. It is a path toward a continent no longer shadowed by history, but standing proud for tomorrow. Carry this vision forward. Walk this path and witness Africa ascend. God bless Africa.